guys, how's it going? Today's video is going to be my May wrap-up. I read 11 books in the month of May. There was a lot of them that I didn't quite like, so it was definitely a quantity over quality reading month, apparently. Before I go over the books themselves though, I'm going to go over the readathons that I participated in and how those went. So first, I participated in the mental health-a-thon. This one had a bingo board. I'm going to put a picture up on the screen. But it was a super chill readathon. You could read as much or as little as you wanted to. So I actually ended up reading 2 of the host picks with Turtles All the Way Down and Eleanor, Oliphant is Completely Fine. I read a mental health nonfiction with Wherever You Go, There You Are. I read a YA mental health book with Turtles All the Way Down. And for green on the cover, it was also Wherever You Go, There You Are. So all in all, I say I did pretty good with that. Then for the Pokemon readathon, I think I did pretty decent with that one. The book that I read with the most points was definitely the Arabian Nights, Tales from 1001 Nights. I actually got 3,324 points just from that book. But altogether, with the 11 books, I got 13,654 points, which I'm pretty proud of. So I am definitely on my way of becoming a Pokemon master. So moving on to the books now, the first book that I read in the month of May was Wherever You Go, There You Are by Jon Kabat-Zinn. This is a self-help book all about mindfulness and different mindfulness practices and whatnot. I ended up giving this a 7 out of 10. Now, I'm someone that doesn't usually vibe with the writing style or the tone of most self-help books, and this was definitely better for me than most of the other ones that I read. It was very casual and conversational, and I like that because I find sometimes with self-help books, they can kind of become a little bit too preachy, I guess. So I thought this did a really good job with that. My biggest complaint though is that I didn't like the way it was organized. It's almost like a bunch of different jumbled thoughts and pieces of advice all just kind of compiled into one book. Like, it doesn't really flow all that well, and each chapter is just like 1 to 2 pages usually, and it's really just kind of quick little thoughts. Overall, I don't think I'd ever reread this book cover to cover, but like I said, there's definitely some things that I would check out again, and I got what I wanted from it, so I think 7 out of 10. The second book I read was an audiobook, and that was Born on a Blue Day by Daniel Timmitt. I've seen this audiobook available at my library for a little while now, and it also has the word blue in the title, which is a prompt for the Pokemon readathon that I was doing. So I decided to finally pick it up, and I ended up giving it a 5 out of 10. This is a memoir, and if the name isn't ringing a bell to you, he is an autistic savant, and an actual savant, not the Hollywood gimmick that's going around sometimes, but that's another conversation for another day. He's also the man that recited about a bazillion numbers of pi for, I want to say it was epilepsy research. I think. That's where I knew him from anyways. I decided to rate it a 5 out of 10 because I feel like there was very equal things that I liked and disliked about it. I found it really fascinating how he thought, and he was explaining that the way that he sees numbers and what helps him memorize them is the way that he can visualize them, and just the way that he described it was just so fascinating, and it was really well written in those sections. But the rest of the story overall was kind of like you run into an interesting stranger and they're just telling you random stories about their life. The stories are interesting, but it's still a stranger. You don't really connect with them. So even though I knew who he was, it was detached enough that, I don't know, I feel like for memoirs I need that little bit more personal connection to the author. And I just found this was a little bit more distant. But there are a lot of parts that honestly I found my attention was kind of wavering and I just wasn't really that invested into a lot of parts of his life. But overall, I thought it was really interesting. It was a different perspective that I've never read from before, and I liked that part. And then I kind of went on a bit more of an audiobook spree, and the next one I listened to was Warcraft by Marie Lu. This one was on my wish list for my library for a little while now, and it finally became available, so I picked it up. I ended up giving this a 6 out of 10 though. Warcraft is essentially a virtual reality game, and it's in a world where virtual reality has pretty much become the new reality, if that makes sense. Like, you're very plugged in, and it's very kind of technological and kind of sci-fi, and I found it really fun. I really liked the premise, but the plot was so predictable. From the very beginning, it was really obvious where it was going. You could see the plot twist coming a mile away. There was one plot twist that I didn't see coming, but that's because the author didn't set it up at all. Like, I even listened back and there were no clues. They just kind of decided something out of nowheres. And I don't like when it's done that way. So there was one plot twist that I didn't see coming, but that's because I don't think it was a well executed plot twist. But anyways, I really wasn't into the plot. The characters I couldn't care less about. The romance was super sudden and I didn't understand any of the characters' reactions with each other. Like, the main character and the guy who created Warcross he was always one of her idols, and then she meets him and she's super mean to him and hates him, which I couldn't quite understand why. Like, his actions didn't seem at all rude or anything, and then all of a sudden she's in love with him. The things that I did like though were the occasional like gaming type references. It wasn't quite to the level of like Ready Player One, but there was a couple of really funny ones. There was a Leroy Jenkins reference that was just so casual that it actually made me laugh, and I don't usually actually laugh out loud when I'm reading, so I thought that was really funny. I really liked the scenes with the game itself. Like, they were fast-paced and exciting, and I liked the action. But I feel like they never explained the rules of the game. Like, I could understand the basic premise of the game, but I don't know the different roles, what the different players do. Like, I didn't quite get it, and I would have liked a little bit more immersion in that. Another thing that I want to mention is the rep in this. So there is LGBT plus rep, which I liked. I thought it was done fine. You know, nothing bad to say about it. There was also disability rep, and I feel kind of weird about it. One of the primary characters, the captain of the Warcraft team, is in a wheelchair. I believe they say he's paraplegic, but I'm not 100% positive, but that's what I'm remembering. And I thought that was really interesting because it's rep that you don't see very often. The part that made me feel a little bit iffy about it though is when he's in the virtual reality Warcraft game, he's fully able-bodied. And while I understand from a plot perspective, because, you know, you're running around, you're playing this very physical game, it makes sense, but it just felt a little bit too much like the happy ending trope of the disabled character becoming able-bodied. Now, I have never been in a wheelchair, so I would definitely recommend looking at Own Voices reviews and opinions to see how they think. So like I said, I gave it a 6.5 out of 10. And I really wasn't intending to continue with the series, but the very end, one of the plot twists that I was just curious how they were going to pull it off, and because the sequel was still available on audiobook, I figured might as well give it a try. So the next book that I read was Wildcard by Marie Lu, the sequel. I'm not going to go into the specifics on the plot for this one because it's major spoilers for the first book, but I ended up giving this one a 5 out of 10. All of the complaints that I had about Warcraft, I had again in Wildcard. So it had more of what I didn't like character relationships and the cringy romance, and less of what I did like, the game and all of the cool virtual reality stuff. Also, the main characters kept making really dumb decisions, and a lot of their problems would have been solved with communication, and I just really hate that. I feel like it's lazy, it doesn't really help the writing any. So yeah, I don't really have much else to say, but it wasn't great. Next, I read another audiobook. This one was one of the group picks for the mental health-a-thon, and it was Eleanor, Oliphant is Completely Fine. However, I also ended up giving this one a low rating. I rated it a 4 out of 10. First, the trigger warnings for this book are child abuse, domestic abuse, and mentions of suicide. The main problems with this was that I just didn't like Eleanor at all, and I know that you're not really supposed to like her, but I didn't dislike her in a way that was fun enough, if that makes sense. She was just unlikable in a I don't care about you kind of way. The only character that I really liked at all was Raymond, and not enough to carry the whole book. I also just really didn't like the writing style. I feel like it spent way too long really spelling out pretty obvious things. Like, I'm trying to find one that isn't at all a spoiler. So Eleanor's face is scarred, they mentioned that really early on, and it's very clearly like from a fire. And it takes them so friggin' long to say what happened with the fire, and it's really obvious right away, like with all of the other clues. It's just not a surprise. But I think it's like 3/4 of the way through the book, or maybe further than that they finally explain it, and it's like, yes, I know, you basically told me that 10 chapters ago, like, hurry up and move on, I don't care anymore. And it just didn't build out the suspense very well. I just feel like sometimes the writing style kind of assumed that the reader was dumb, and I really hate that. It just really bothers me. Another thing that bothered me, and this is kind of specific, but Eleanor isn't much of a technology person. She's never owned a cell phone, she doesn't have a home computer, any of that stuff. But then she ends up getting a smartphone and a laptop for reasons that I'm not going to explain. And I thought it was done really badly. Like earlier when she's talking about email, she calls it electronic mail, and just some of the ways that she describes it, you can tell she knows nothing about computers or the internet, even though she uses it every day at her work, but whatever. And she goes from having no idea what anything is, never even owning a cell phone before, to within a couple days knowing the ins and out of Twitter and Instagram, and like, no. Like, she understands how hashtags work, like she knows enough to do pretty decent internet stalking, and it was just really unbelievable. It just seemed very far-fetched that she could go from not even understanding what email is to all of a sudden know how to do an in-depth Instagram and Twitter stalking. But overall, I couldn't care less about the characters, I didn't like the writing, and the twist ending, I thought really ruined the novel. I really would have preferred it had that not happened. Then I finally finished another physical book, and that was The Arabian Nights, Tales from 1001 Nights. It took me so long to finish this. I ended up giving this a 4.5 out of 10 because I felt like it was mediocre, but slightly on the less enjoyable end of mediocre for me. There were definitely some stories that I really liked. Like, there's some that I definitely think that I would reread the short stories again, and some that made me laugh, and some were really good. But there were a lot that's not that interesting or just a little bit too all over the place for me. Because if you don't know, this is a collection of many short stories, and it's framed around the narrative that it's a woman telling her husband, because he always murders his wife first thing in the morning, so she's there telling him a story so he doesn't kill her, and then it lasts 1001 nights. To be fair though, the version that I have is written in a very like old English style, and in the very long introduction it goes into how it tried to keep the text as true to the original source material as possible. So there's some words in here and names that are changed to stay more true to the story, and some of the stories I couldn't quite understand, so I would look up more information about them to see if I could understand the backstory, and they would be very different stories sometimes. Like, some of the details were just completely different. So I also have a slightly different version than the common versions, so that didn't quite help. I think, to be fair, it's because it's stories about a culture that I don't quite understand, written in an English that I don't quite understand, so it just made it a little bit hard to get through sometimes. Also, going off the fact that this is very true to the original source material, this is hella sexist, hella racist. The men are just murdering their wives because their wives are cheating on them, so they just brutally murder them because, of course. And they have black slaves and they have white slaves, and they treat both of them like absolute crap. I think that the line that you kind of have to toe with classics though is acknowledging that their content is problematic while also understanding the times that they were written in. Like, this was written hundreds of years ago. So even though I obviously don't condone any of it, I don't know. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. Okay, I'm just sitting here editing this, and I just want to jump in and say that this was filmed before the events in the States got extra out of hand. I don't really know how to word that because I don't want to say when the, violence and murders and stuff got worse, because they've always been bad, but I hope you guys know what I mean. I don't want to make it sound like I'm excusing racism in any form, and I hope that I explained myself well enough that you kind of knew what I meant, but I just want to say that obviously racism is never okay and we shouldn't be making excuses for it. I'm going to leave some resources linked down below, and I'm not going to go in depth into my thoughts and my feelings about racism. Obviously racism is terrible, it's horrible, there's no excuse for it, but it's not my voice you should be listening to, so I'm going to link some resources down below, and definitely look for own voices, opinions, and thoughts and stuff, and just support people however you can. But I just didn't want this clip to be taken in bad taste with everything that's going on. I just didn't want people to think that I was like skimming over the racism bits, because no matter what, it's not okay, it's not excusable, and yeah, like I said, links are down below, check out the resources and do whatever you can. About the stories themselves though, they were very repetitive. It was all wife cheats on husband, so husband murders wife and all of the men. Also, a thing that came up way more often than I would have expected it to is a man recites good poetry, so the king just hires him and gives his kingdom to him because he doesn't have any sons. That happened a lot. I didn't realize how much they valued poetry, but there's a lot of poetry in this. So again, I am glad that I read this. I'm glad that it's something else I can understand, but I'm never going to reread the entire book. I'm probably going to reread a couple of the short stories now and then because there were some that were really interesting. So like I said, slightly less than mediocre, so like 4.5. And then I finally read a book that I loved. That was The Last Battle. This is the final book in the Chronicles of Narnia series. I gave this a 9.5 out of 10. I knew I was gonna like this, but I didn't expect to love it nearly as much as I did. I won't go into specifics of the plot, but it's about the last battle. And I feel like a lot of Narnia books are fairly predictable, especially because they're so much taken from biblical stories that you kind of already know the stories, and some of them are just, they're children's books. You can see where the story's going. This one, there was a lot that I didn't quite see coming. Like, there were some things that genuinely surprised me and some things that I thought were going to happen that didn't, and I was really impressed with that. Also, the ending, I smiled so much and I cried so much, and it was so many emotions all at once. But overall, I loved this. It was such a beautiful way to end the story, and it's like my favorite type of ending. I'm not going to say anything more than that, but yeah, it was really, really good, and it definitely lifted my spirits in a way, even though it's all about a battle. But either way, very, very good, and I absolutely loved it. Then I reread Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. I've already read this. This one was a reread because I wanted to tab it up. It was just as good the second time around. I gave it an 8.5 out of 10. The thing with this book is the plot doesn't matter. Like, the plot is completely ridiculous, and it's written in a way that you can tell the plot is completely just there for the characters. Like, this is very much a character-driven book, and it's very much a mental health book that just happens to have a plot happening in the background, if that makes sense. Again, I really loved the OCD rep in this. If you don't know, John Green himself has OCD, so it is own voices, and just so many of the things that he says and so many of the things that the main characters experience are just so well written and explained in such a way that's, it's like things that I thought but couldn't put into words. Also, I really love that they have a supportive parent in this. I mentioned before that I think that's something that we need to see more of in different OCD representation and other mental health representation, is supportive parents who don't just, ignore their kids or say they're being kids. Like, parents that want to get them help, kids that go to therapy, parents that check and make sure they take their meds, like things like that. I think this book did really, really well, but it also didn't make the mother perfect. Like, she asks if she's okay too often, and it's a way that you can tell it's 100% from a good place and she's trying to check on her, but she doesn't quite know how to, but she's still doing her best. And I found that balance was really, really well done. The main reason why I rated it an 8.5 and not a higher rating is because even though I know that I'm reading this book for the characters and for the representation, I wish that there was also a plot, like a plot that mattered. It was just a little bit too ridiculous for me and a little bit too far-fetched, and if it would have had a strong plot also, I definitely think it would have been a 10 out of 10, but because it's just missing basically that whole aspect, I couldn't quite rate it higher than an 8.5. But I still really, really loved this, and I'm so glad that I reread it. Next, I listened to the audiobook of The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. Now, this one, I knew I wasn't going to like it because of everything that I've heard about the romance, and again, I'm not someone that cares about romance, but there were some things that I was just curious about, and again, I saw it available at my local library in an audiobook, and I was just doing a puzzle all day anyways, so it didn't cost me any money, it didn't cost me any time, so I thought, might as well give it a try, and I gave it a 3 out of 10. If you don't know, this is the story of 3 sisters. One of them is half fae, and her real father comes into the mortal world and murders the parents, kidnaps the kids, and brings them into the fae world, and it's following one of the younger sisters who's completely human as she kind of navigates this world and all of this stuff. And I didn't like any of the characters. Like, I thought that the world building was interesting and I liked some of the darkness in it, but I didn't like the characters and I strongly hated the romance. The guy is incredibly abusive her whole life. Like, he's a complete asshole and like physically harms her and is really rude and kind of drugs her at one point, and it gets a little bit kind of roofy-ish, like, and then she falls in love with him anyways. Like, no. I strongly disagree with it. I don't like that trope, and I know that fictional relationships can be problematic, but when the problematic aspects aren't addressed at all, and when it's almost glorified, I have a problem with it. And to each their own. If people like reading that kind of thing, have at her, but I just don't think that it's the type of relationship that should be glorified without having the discussion on why it's wrong. Next, I reread Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I read this back in high school, and I've just been wanting to reread it because there was just a lot of things that I kind of forgot about it, and I decided, why not? I ended up giving this an 8 out of 10. I'm very glad that I reread it and have it again fresh in my mind, and I love Heathcliff and I love to hate Heathcliff, and I just find he's such a fascinating character, and I think it's really interesting that there's a strong argument of him being the villain and the hero, and I just really like that because he's very much the villain of the story, but also you're rooting for him, and there's some moments that he's kind of the hero of the story, mostly earlier on in the book, but I don't know, I really like it. I like the characters, I think it's a very interesting story, and yeah, 8 out of 10. And finally, the last book that I read was Les Dragons de l'Empereur Noir. This is the second in the Chevalier d'Emeraude series by Anne Robillard. I gave this a 4 out of 10, and I keep going back and forth. I don't think I'm going to finish the series. I couldn't care less about any of the characters. Like, all the characters are very, like, one-dimensional. I really don't know anything about any of them other than their names, and even then, there's such a huge cast of characters, and none of them have any backstory or any information. Like, I could probably only picture maybe 2 of the characters. And yeah, I just am not invested in it. I'm not a big fan of the writing style. It's very repetitive and a little bit too dry for my tastes. I don't feel like they're well written enough for me to want to continue with 8 more books. I'm not quite decided enough that I'm going to unhaul them yet, because a part of me, you know, I own the whole series, so I kind of want to read them anyways, but at the same time, I don't care. So, we'll see. But overall, like I said, this one I gave a 4 out of 10. Yeah, I have nothing else to say. So there we go. Those were the 11 books that I read this month. A couple really good ones, but most of them were either mediocre or bad. And that's a bit of a bummer, but I mean, you can't always have really great reading months, and at least I got enough points that I could help defeat Team Rocket. So, you know, that's what really matters. So that is all for today's video. If you guys enjoyed it, please click the like button to let me know, and subscribe to stay up to date with the rest of my videos. I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday, usually reading or writing related. So I hope to see you guys next time, and until then, have a great day. Bye!